the big picture of your labs is really empowering, and it can help you have those conversations with your doctor or your provider if you feel like you're not getting the answers you need or you're spinning your wheels. And you can go back and say, okay, I got all these labs done. Even if you have to go get them done out of pocket or find your own place to do them, you can say, I got all these labs done, and this is the picture we have now. Like, look, my progesterone is too low, or look, my thyroid is actually not as in a healthy range. Like, sure, it's maybe in a normal range, but it's not in the range it needs to be for my fertility to be optimized. And I think this is also important because sometimes when someone is struggling to get pregnant, they'll test your basic hormones. They might test estradiol, they might test progesterone, might not test it at the right day of your cycle, might just test it on a random day of your cycle. Maybe they'll test AMH to see like what your egg reserve looks like. And if everything comes back normal, they'll just call it good and say, you know what, just keep trying. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of What We Tell Our Daughters. Today, we are talking about hormones and tests that you may want to get if you are thinking about getting pregnant. Well, let me rephrase that. Tests that you want to get if you're thinking about getting pregnant, or if pregnancy is something that you want at any point in the future. I believe these tests are important because they're going to help give you a baseline so you know where you are now, and you can track this over time so that you don't have to get to the day where now you're finally ready to have a baby and you're like, you know what? I want it tomorrow. Because that's what usually happens. Women are like, not ready, not ready. Men, same thing, not ready, not ready. And then, oh, okay, I'm ready. And unfortunately, our bodies aren't always ready at the same time. So, today I want to talk about some tests that will help give you an idea of where you stand as far as fertility goes. These are really great tests to continue to track over time. So, I recommend that if you're actively trying to get pregnant and it's taking a while, or you're not sure what's happening, these are great tests to do every 3 months. This will help you understand if the things that you're doing in your daily life to help change or better your fertility, like nutrition, like supplementation, like stress reduction and movement and sleep and mastering our circadian rhythm and all of these pieces, lowering toxicity, if all of these things that we're doing are moving the needle in the right direction. These are great tests to do. If you just want to track your fertility over time because, say, you're not ready right now, but you know that maybe in 5 years you will be, then you want to do these every 6 months to a year so that you know where you're at. Because if things start to change and the picture starts to look not as positive when we're looking at the fertility side, then you can start doing things now. You can do this alongside birth control of whatever type you choose. You can do this alongside of barrier contraceptives. So if you don't want to do hormones, but you want to make sure that you're not going to get pregnant, you can still optimize your fertility and avoid pregnancy at the same time so that when the day comes, you are ready. It's easy. And you don't have to go through the frustration and the stress of, well, now I'm ready, but my body's not, and my body's not cooperating, because I know exactly how that feels, and it is not a fun place to be. So let's dive into some of these tests. We're going to start first with the hormone testing. So when we're looking at hormone testing, oftentimes we do this around day 3 of our cycle. And that works just great because that's when these hormones are kind of at their base, their lowest. For blood labs, looking at fertility, beginning of your cycle around day 3 is totally fine. Usually we do it right after you've ended your menstrual cycle. That's great. The ones we want to test around here are luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. We want to test estradiol. We want to test anti-Müllerian hormone, AMH, testosterone, DHEAS, and prolactin. So let's talk a little bit about each one of these in more depth and what each of them mean. So luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. These two hormones are what helps our follicle actually grow and mature that egg in the first half of our cycle. These are really important. At ovulation, luteinizing hormone is what triggers ovulation, but follicle stimulating hormone is what's going to help that follicle begin to do its magic and grow the garden, per se. Estradiol. So as follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone stimulate the follicle, as the follicle grows, it releases estrogen. that is estradiol. But we want to make sure that our estradiol levels are at a baseline where they need to be at the beginning of our cycle. Because if our estradiol levels are way high, now we have a sign that, maybe we're not detoxing properly. Maybe there's another hormonal imbalance that's playing into this inability to get pregnant. Maybe there's something else we need to look at here. Do we have too much adipose fat tissues, things like that? We have anti-Müllerian hormone. So AMH, we consider to be a pretty good indicator over time of how many eggs someone has. So when you're young and you still have a lot of eggs left, AMH is going to be quite high. As you get closer to menopause or postmenopause, AMH is going to go to 0. So where that AMH number falls can be an indicator of how many eggs you have left, not to a perfect number, but on the spectrum, do you still have a lot? Are we starting to lose eggs? And we need to be thinking about really optimizing our fertility and our egg quality too, because that's super important. If we only have a few eggs left, but they're really high quality, that's a totally different story for someone than having a lot of eggs left, but none of them are high quality because our body hasn't been getting what it needs to maintain that egg quality. Now, I want to just say quickly here that AMH can also be high when someone has PCOS. So, when we have polycystic ovarian syndrome, AMH can be a lab that can actually diagnose it now, assuming that somebody doesn't have excess obesity. When we have obesity, sometimes AMH is not as accurate. So, that's another reason that your doctor might look at your AMH levels. We have testosterone. So when we have excess testosterone or too little testosterone, neither one is a good thing. Again, with polycystic ovarian syndrome, we often see maybe that estradiol is too high and estradiol is too low and testosterone is too high, right? So we want these labs to help give us the fuller picture of what our hormone landscape looks like. Same thing with DHES and prolactin. So prolactin is the hormone that we make when we're breastfeeding. It triggers milk. And so in someone who's breastfeeding, prolactin is going to be high and estradiol is usually lower, which can make it much harder to have a pregnancy or to ovulate regularly or to maintain fertility. That's why we say if someone's exclusively breastfeeding for the first 6 months, usually that acts as a birth control. For me, that's acted for birth control for almost 2 years now. So you never know. It's different for every person. I've had some women who exclusively breastfed but started getting periods and ovulation even just a couple of months after giving birth. So those are the hormones that we want to look at when we're thinking about fertility. We also want to look at our thyroid because there's a lot of research now that shows that even small deviations in thyroid function will alter fertility or completely inhibit our ability to get pregnant. If our thyroid is too slow and we don't have, you can think of that as like a hypoenergetic state. We don't have enough energy. The body, that's sending the signal to the body, like it's not safe to have a baby. We don't have energy to grow this baby. We're not getting the nutrients we need. So we're not going to do this. Same thing on the too high side when your TSH goes low. So your thyroid is actually faster than it should be. We can see the same thing, but it is more common when your thyroid is sluggish. So when you're on the hypo side, that we see big alterations in fertility. So when we're looking at thyroid, the first thing that people usually test is called TSH, thyroid stimulating hormone. And what that hormone does is it tells the thyroid, go make thyroid hormone, right? So that hormone is actually secreted by the pituitary gland. That sends the signal to the thyroid, release thyroid hormone. When your TSH is over 2.5, so the normal functional range we say is about, 0.5 to 2.5. Usually 0.5 is even a little on the low side. And anything over 2.5, we definitely see alterations in fertility. And people usually don't feel as good too. This is really interesting because a normal medical reference range, like if you were to go get this done, usually they'll say it's normal up to 4.5 or sometimes even 5, depending on the lab. That's way too high. If your TSH is that high, you probably don't feel very good. You probably feel really tired. You don't have very much energy. You may have difficulty losing weight. You may have some depression, anxiety, things like that. So we really want this to be in a functional range for optimal health and optimal fertility. And then along with that TSH, we want to ask for free T4, free T3, reverse T3, and then our thyroid antibodies, TPO antibodies and TG antibodies. You may have to push a little bit to get these tests done because oftentimes your doctor isn't going to test these right off the bat. They're not going to say, oh, let's look at your thyroid and test all of these things. But if you've looked into other things and you're still having trouble getting pregnant, then this is definitely somewhere to look. If you want to optimize your fertility, this is somewhere to look because this doesn't just happen for fertility. Unfortunately, thyroid issues are more and more common. They're especially common in women. We see more and more women being underdiagnosed with things like Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid autoimmune condition, or even just hypothyroid in general. Those symptoms that go along with thyroid imbalance, like feeling tired, sluggish, having a little bit of depression, difficulty losing weight, these are unfortunately symptoms that Western medicine often pushes to the side. And they say, well, you just need to eat better, sleep better, exercise more, whatever. And so it can take a long time to dig deeper here. So you have to really advocate for yourself in getting these tests done. That's for your thyroid. The next step is things like basic blood labs. So we want to look at a CBC, that's a complete blood count, a CBC, that's a complete blood count, and a CMP, which is a comprehensive metabolic panel. These are pretty standard labs. These are labs that your doctor probably runs every time you go in for a primary care appointment because these are more like a big scan, an overview of just at a basic level, do we have enough red blood cells? Do we have enough white blood cells? Are white blood cells high, which tells us maybe we have some underlying infection going on? Are certain white blood cells high, which might give an indicator into something going on in the gut or parasites or things like that. So those are some basic labs that you can get to look at. We also want to look at things like our hemoglobin A1C and our insulin levels. So we know that having diabetes or having poor blood sugar control can affect fertility, and not just fertility, it affects all of our metabolic health. Anything that is affecting our overall metabolic health, our ability to make and use energy is going to affect our fertility. Let me just also say that these are labs that we want to get just for optimizing our health. So if you're someone that wants to live a long time and you never want to have kids, that's okay too. And these are still important tests for you to get. So I'm using these tests as a frame of reference for fertility, but I think these are actually really important for everyone, at least once a year. And if you're trying to optimize for fertility more often. So we have our A1C, we have our fasting insulin. So those are different, right? Hemoglobin A1C is looking at an average blood sugar control over the course of 3 months. That's a helpful tool because that helps us understand, if we look at your actual blood sugar, what has it been? Has it been overall high, overall low? Maybe you've had a lot of spikes and falls, but that makes you in general, you're kind of average. Okay, that's helpful. What that doesn't tell us is what that graph looked like. Did we have big spikes and big falls, but your average looks good? Were we pretty stable, but we were always a little too high, or pretty stable, but always a little low? So this is where fasting insulin comes in. This is a different test that we should do and could do to help us understand better the health of our pancreas and the health of our overall insulin resistance levels in the body. So a fasting insulin tells us when there's no food around, no sugar, nothing that the body needs insulin for, is it in a good range or is it still a little bit too high? Because the higher our fasting insulin creeps up, the more insulin resistant we are. And so maybe your hemoglobin A1C looks good because your average blood sugar control has been okay. But your fasting insulin is high, telling us that your body's starting to no longer tolerate that much sugar as well, or not able to use fuel as efficiently as it once was. But we haven't seen those changes in blood sugar yet. We see it in insulin first. So it's kind of like a leading indicator of where our metabolic health is. Then we have high sensitivity CRP, which is an indicator of inflammation in the body. And we also have all of our cholesterol labs. So lipid panels looking at cholesterol, looking at total cholesterol, LP little a. We have what we call our good cholesterol, our HDL, and our LDL. So looking at this overall breakdown of where our triglycerides are and our cholesterol is really helpful to understand where our cardiac health is, because we do know that there may be a connection between poor cardiac labs pre-pregnancy and things like preeclampsia. Case in point, right here, right? Okay. We also have important nutritional markers. So there is no world where nutrition is not important for fertility. What we put into our body, how we nourish ourselves, the fuel that our cells have to create a new human is hugely important in the overall picture of how easy it's going to be for us to have a baby. So a few nutritional markers that I like to get that we see in the functional medicine world, people often ask for are vitamin D. Vitamin D status is really, really important for way more than just fertility, overall health, bone health, mental health, all kinds of health. And vitamin D levels we'd like to see somewhere between 50 and 80, although a normal reference range in a lab might be 20 to 100. Usually over 80, we're inching up on the high side, and anywhere under 50 is really probably too low for most people. But because that reference range is the low end is usually around 20, someone might be 20 and their doctor's going to say, you look just fine. When really, for an optimal healthy person, we want it to be much closer to 50 or more. Then we have iron, and we have iron binding capacity, total iron binding capacity. So these two tests help us understand how our body is able to carry oxygen if we're anemic. So there are a lot of women who struggle with anemia, especially during pregnancy, and that can really increase that fatigue. It can be a risk to the baby. It can be a risk if we have a lot of bleeding during pregnancy, all types of those things. So although this might not prevent us from getting pregnant, it's going to help us have a much healthier pregnancy if we have these in an optimal range. We have B12, we have homocysteine, which is a measure of also some inflammation in our body. Homocysteine goes high, and homocysteine also converts to methionine. See if I can say my amino acids today, methionine. And we need this for detoxification. So homocysteine is high sometimes if you've heard of MTHFR. That's a genotype, a genetic type, where we're not able to use our B vitamins and actually convert them to the methylated form as well. And so we're unable to convert homocysteine back to methionine in this cycle. So homocysteine stays high. That can happen for a lot of people. A lot of people have this gene SNP, we would say. So we want to look at homocysteine and see, because it's actually quite easy. All we need to do is give you the methylated form of those B vitamins, the already methylated form, so that your body has it in the form that it can use, and it doesn't have to do the work of putting that methyl group on. Then the final and important test that we really want to do if we're looking at active fertility is progesterone. And we want to do this about 1 week after ovulation. So if you have a perfectly perfect 28-day cycle, we're looking at about day 21 to measure your progesterone. And the reason for that is that when we ovulate, the follicle turns into what we call a corpus luteum, and it starts to secrete progesterone. And progesterone is what helps us maintain that pregnancy. So if progesterone levels are too low, then our body's not able to maintain a pregnancy. And even if we did ovulate, and even if that egg was fertilized, we're not going to maintain it. We're not going to continue to grow that baby, and we'll have a miscarriage, but it won't even really feel like a miscarriage. It's just going to be like a period. We probably didn't even have implantation at that point. So we need to test progesterone 1 week after ovulation so that we know, one, did we ovulate? Because if progesterone is still zip, nothing, then it's a good sign we actually didn't ovulate at all. Or if if it has ticked up, but it's just too low, then we're not at where we need to be to maintain. And this is important because progesterone can be low for a number of reasons. If we have a lot of stress in our life, then the body prioritizes a cortisol pathway over a progesterone hormone pathway. And we only have a finite number of resources available to make hormones in our body. So we have to start thinking about, why is our progesterone low at that week after ovulation? What is it that's causing that? How can we peel back the layers of the onion to create a more fertile environment for a baby to grow? So, those are our basic tests that we want to look at when we're thinking about optimizing for our fertility, uh, preparing for pregnancy in the future, even if it's years into the future. Or really, just if you're someone who wants to optimize their health, if you're someone that says, I want to live to be 100, I don't ever want kids, but I want to live to be 100, these are still tests that you should do because fertility is a vital sign. Having optimal fertility tells us that we have optimal health. If we don't have optimal health and it's not safe for us to have a baby, then our fertility suffers. And therefore, we can extrapolate to say that our overall health isn't really in that great of a place if it's not safe for us to do the one thing that biologically we are mostly programmed to do, which is to procreate. So I hope that this was helpful for you if you're on a fertility journey. I think that knowing the big picture of your labs is really empowering, and it can help you have those conversations with your doctor or your provider if you feel like you're not getting the answers you need or you're spinning your wheels. And you can go back and say, okay, I got all these labs done. Even if you have to go get them done out of pocket or find your own place to do them, you can say, I got all these labs done, and this is the picture we have now. Like, look, my progesterone is too low, or look, my thyroid is actually not as in a healthy range. Like, sure, it's maybe in a normal range, but it's not in the range it needs to be for my fertility to be optimized. And I think this is also important because sometimes when someone is struggling to get pregnant, they'll test your basic hormones. They might test estradiol, they might test progesterone, might not test it at the right day of your cycle, might just test it on a random day of your cycle. Maybe they'll test AMH to see like what your egg reserve looks like. And if everything comes back normal, they'll just call it good and say, you know what, just keep trying. But there's a much bigger picture of to this puzzle, and there's a lot of money being spent on IVF and these more, what I would consider invasive ways of getting pregnant. And I do not shame anyone for going that pathway if that is what you've decided is right for you, or maybe that just feels like the best and the quickest path. That's okay. But I have seen when we do things in functional medicine to return and restore balance, you might get pregnant much faster than IVF could offer for a much lower cost, for a much less invasive procedure, for a lot less hormones, exogenous hormones in your body. So I really encourage women to take this path first, to try these things, to test these things and see where they're at and have these harder conversations with their practitioners, or find someone who has a different opinion to help you see the bigger picture before we go down the path of spending tens of thousands of dollars really, really hoping for something that is quite difficult to achieve. Actually, IVF doesn't have the best success rates. So that's my soapbox on fertility. And I say all of this with love and most all coming from a place of wanting to give you the information so that you are empowered to make these decisions. Because again, the world is changing. And I think that when my daughter is my age, I imagine that fertility is going to look potentially pretty dire if we don't change the world we live in and change the things we're putting in our body and change the toxins that we are surrounded by all the time. We're going to see really, really big effects in terms of the number of children we're able to have, our fertility at all. Who knows? Who knows? It's for men and for women, it's a huge problem. So the more you know about it now, as you're thinking about how to optimize your fertility, these are things that you can teach your daughter, your son, your future generations. And again, as we grow our daughters within us, we are actually growing all of the eggs of our granddaughters or our grandsons. And so this is a really important thing to think about. Our health while we're pregnant impacts multiple future generations, not just this next generation. So the work that we might do to optimize, to restore balance, to restore health, to understand this is going to have a trickle effect into all of the rest of what the future of the world looks like. And I think this is somewhere where women have a lot of power, and we're not using it to its fullest extent. So I hope you found today's podcast interesting. And if you're watching on YouTube, please leave a comment or share with me if you want some information on where to get these labs. I'm happy to share with you as well, because I've done this for myself and I've been on this journey, and I know what it's like. So please reach out, and I will see you in the next episode.